Welcome along. Today, we're going to be exploring something absolutely critical in the world of deals, the documents that make them actually happen.
That's right. Specifically, we're focusing on the chapter covering transaction documents from Magnus Kjøller's book, Deal Structuring.
It's a really practical book, and this chapter is key. So our aim here is to, demystify these agreements a bit
Exactly. We want to look at what they are, the steps in creating them, maybe touch on some pros and cons.
and use some examples from the book to make it all a bit more concrete.
Because understanding this stuff, it's essential for anyone involved in deals, really, regardless of how technical you think you are.
Definitely. So Keeler starts by defining transaction documents. What are we actually talking about in simple terms?
Well, fundamentally, these are the legally binding agreements. They come after the negotiations, after the due diligence. They're what finalizes the whole thing.
Right. They turn the handshake agreement, so to speak, into something enforceable.
Precisely. They spell out all the obligations, the rights, the real nuts and bolts of how the deal works.
Okay. So where does Keeler usually start when breaking these down? There seem to be quite a few types.
Yeah, there can be. He often kicks off with a really common one, the share purchase agreement, the SPA.
The SPA. Okay. Sounds important. What's its main job?
Its main job is handling the sale of existing shares. So if you're buying shares from someone else, not directly from the company issuing new ones.
Gotcha.
The SBA lays out all the terms, price, number of shares, when it all closes. And a crucial part of the SPA, Keeler really emphasizes this, are the seller warranties.
Ah, yes. Seller warranties. You hear that term thrown around a lot. Why are they such a big deal for the buyer?
Because they're essentially promises. The
Yeah.
seller is warranting or promising certain things about the company are true.
Like what kind of things?
Oh, all sorts. That the financial accounts are accurate, that they own the assets they claim to, that they're complying with laws. It's quite extensive.
Hmm.
And Killer points out this gives the buyer protection if one of those promises turns out to be untrue later on.
After the deal's done.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Then the buyer usually has a claim against the seller for damages. It's like a safety net against hidden problems.
Makes sense. So that covers buying existing shares. What if the company is raising money by issuing new shares?
That's typically where the subscription agreement comes in.
Subscription agreement. Okay.
Yeah, it's the investor's formal commitment to buy those new shares directly from the company. Keeler notes it often goes alongside or is part of a wider investment agreement.
So it details the specifics. How much money? How many shares?
Precisely that, the core terms of that specific share subscription.
Okay. SBA for existing shares. Subscription agreement for new ones. Now, what happens once you have multiple owners? That's where the shareholders agreement or SHA fits in, right?
Absolutely. The SHA is super important. It's a contract between the shareholders themselves.
Right. Setting the ground rules for how they'll operate together.
Exactly. Keeler stresses this. It defines their rights, their responsibilities, how decisions get made, what happens if someone wants to sell their shares, all that stuff.
Yeah.
It prevents future fights, ideally.
And he uses that story about Johnny, doesn't he? With the preemption rights.
Yeah.
That really stuck with me.
Oh, yeah, the Johnny example is perfect. He's an early investor, right?
Yeah.
And his SHA didn't have preemption rights. So when the company raised more money later,
He didn't get the chance to buy more shares first to keep his percent.
exactly, he got diluted. So when the big exit happened, his payout was way smaller than he expected. It shows how one clause, or the lack of it, can have huge consequences.
Wow. So preemption rights are key. What other typical things would you find in an SHA?
Well, Keeler lists quite a few common ones. Things like voting rights, how the board is appointed, drag-along and tag-along rights.
Drag along and tag along.
Mm-hmm.
What are those quickly?
Drag-along forces minority shareholders to sell if the majority wants to sell the whole company. Tag-along lets minority shareholders join in on the same terms if a majority shareholder sells their stake. Protects everyone in different ways.
Okay.
Then you've got maybe non-compete clauses, information rights, what info shareholders get. It's all about managing that relationship between the owners.
So the SHA manages the owners, but the company itself has its own rule book too. The Articles of Association. How does that relate?
Good question. The articles, as Keeler puts it, are like the company's constitution, its internal operating manual.
So more fundamental.
Yeah, generally. They cover things like the company's purpose, the different classes of shares, dividend rules, how to amend the articles, even how the company would be wound up. It's a public document, usually filed with the authorities.
And does one override the other? Articles versus SHA.
Generally, the articles take precedence on corporate governance matters. But the SHA is a private contract between shareholders, so it can add more specific rules between them, as long as it doesn't contradict the articles or the law.
Right, so they work together, but the articles set the base layer. Okay.
Yeah.
Now, you mentioned an investment agreement earlier. How does that fit into the picture?
The investment agreement often acts as like an umbrella document when there's a new investment coming in.
Okay.
Kjøller suggests it formalizes the main terms. It might incorporate the subscription agreement, for instance. It'll definitely cover the big things: valuation, the ownership percentage the investor gets, any special rights or conditions they negotiated.
So it pulls several pieces together for that specific investment round.
Oh.
Got it. Now, sometimes an investor isn't quite ready to jump in with equity, right? Kjøller talks about option agreements.
Yes, option deals. Specifically, he often discusses call options. This gives someone the right, but not the obligation, to buy shares later.
When would you use that?
Could be an investor wanting to see how things go first. Or, Kjøller mentions, it's often used to incentivize key people, give them options as a reward instead of immediate shares.
And what are the benefits of doing it that way?
Well, you avoid changing the official shareholder list right away. It can sometimes be quicker and cheaper upfront than a full equity investment. Kjøller uses a scenario showing how the option holder benefits if the company value goes up, but limits their loss if it doesn't.
So flexibility. Interesting. Okay, shifting gears a bit. What about debt? Sometimes debt is part of the deal structure. How are convertible loans documented?
A convertible loan agreement. It outlines the terms of a loan that has the potential to convert into equity down the line.
Based on certain triggers?
Yeah, often linked to milestones or maybe the next funding round. It could be its own agreement or part of the main investment agreement.
Okay, debt that might become ownership. Now, what about earnouts, where part of the price depends on future performance?
Earnout agreements. Kjøller explains these are clauses, usually within the main SPA, that make part of the payment contingent.
So you pay some upfront, and the rest only if the business hits certain targets after the sale.
Exactly, like hitting a specific revenue goal within 2 years, for example. Kjøller notes it helps bridge valuation gaps and keeps the seller motivated.
But he also warns about complexity, right?
Absolutely. Keep earnout clauses simple. That's key advice. Avoid ambiguity that leads to disputes later.
Good advice. Then there are guarantor deals. What's the documentation there?
That's where someone guarantees, say, a company's bank loan, maybe puts up collateral in return for getting some shares.
Right.
The documentation needs to clearly lay out the terms of that guarantee, the equity stake received, and the specific risks involved for the guarantor.
Okay. And if it's just a straightforward loan as part of the deal, like in an LBO?
Then you'll have a dedicated debt agreement or loan agreement. And Kjøller goes into a lot of detail on the kinds of clauses you find here.
Yeah, he covers things like interest, repayment schedule.
Got collateral? Are there personal guarantees? Is liability joint and several? Can the lender sell the debt? How are payments prioritized?
Restrictions on taking on more debt seems important too.
Very. He gives that example where more debt could breach a loan-to-value covenant. Also, penalties for late payment, what constitutes a breach, the lender's right to see the company's financials.
Why the financials?
Risk management for the lender. They need to monitor the health of their loan, basically. See if the borrower is still able to repay.
Makes total sense. Okay, so that's a lot of detailed final documents. But before all that gets drafted, there's usually something else, right? The term sheet.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Kjøller covers the term sheet, or letter of intent, LOI, or heads of agreement, different names, similar idea.
And this is usually non-binding.
Mostly, yes. Its main purpose is to outline the key commercial terms before everyone spends a fortune on lawyers drafting the full docs. It makes sure everyone's broadly on the same page.
But are any parts binding?
Often, yes. Kjøller points out things like confidentiality, agreeing not to share info. Exclusivity, the seller agrees not to negotiate with anyone else for a period. Maybe governing law, and who pays for costs incurred up to that point.
So it sets the stage and locks down a few initial rules. Okay. And then Kjøller briefly mentions closing documents.
Yeah, those are the final bits of paper signed on the day the deal actually closes. Things like share transfer forms, board resolutions confirming everything, the final administrative steps to make the transfer official.
And of course, different deal types, fundraising, IPOs might need their own specific variations or extra agreements.
Definitely. The core documents provide the base, but Kjøller implies you tailor them significantly depending on the specific deal structure.
You know, going through all this, what really stands out from Kjøller's approach is how he constantly links these documents back to the practicalities, the pros and cons, the real-world impact.
I agree. It's not just dry legal stuff. He shows why a seller warranty matters or why simplicity in an earnout is crucial. It bridges that gap between the legalese and the business reality of the deal.
And he's clear that the specific documents needed and how complex they are really depends on the deal itself.
Absolutely. A small seed investment will have simpler docs than a massive multi-jurisdictional acquisition.
And the final, crucial piece of advice he hammers home.
Get good legal advice, always. These are serious, binding contracts. You need experts to review them and ensure your interests are protected. Don't try to DIY this stuff.
Couldn't agree more. So look, if you're involved in any kind of deal making or expect to be, really understanding these transaction documents is just fundamental.
It really is the foundation.
And for that, we definitely recommend Magnus Kjøller's book, Deal Structuring. As we've discussed, it's incredibly practical. It's getting great reviews, seems to be really popular, and you can find it easily on Amazon.
Yeah, it's a valuable resource. And Kjøller also has dealstructuring.com, which offers more tools and resources related to this whole area.
Worth checking out. So perhaps a final thought for our listeners.
Maybe think about your next potential deal, or even a past one. Which specific clauses within these documents suddenly seem much more important now, and why? Reflecting on that could be quite revealing.